They sat me at table 12 behind a floral arrangement so tall and ridiculous it could have hidden a small aircraft. I didn't need to ask why. It was obvious. They didn't want me visible. Not too close to the important people. Not too far to be considered absent. Just tucked away. A polite gesture, dressed up as exile. I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because Marcus Thornfield, my new son-in-law, had no idea what kind of woman he had just tangled with. 3 days later, he would stand in my living room holding papers meant to take everything from me, and I would smile again this time. For real. It's funny how people see what they want to see. An older woman. Quiet. Alone. A little too polite. A little too gray. A little too invisible. That's what I've spent 2 years making the world believe. Ever since Robert passed, I've worn my modesty like armor. I drive an old car. I clip coupons. I carry reusable grocery bags. And I always look just frazzled enough at the bank to make the teller offer extra help. No one suspects a thing. No one suspects that I've been sitting on a $33 million fortune for 2 years. I hadn't told anyone. Not Emma. Not my closest friends. Not even the lawyer who handled Robert's estate. Robert had his reasons, and I respected them. His instructions were clear. Keep it quiet, and keep it protected, because sooner or later someone would come sniffing around, pretending to care. Someone would ask about my health, my house, my finances, and eventually, someone would ask for my signature. I just didn't expect that someone to be Marcus. Now don't get me wrong, Emma was in love. The real kind. The blind kind. The kind that makes you overlook red flags and call them quirks. I didn't want to ruin her day, so I played the role I was given. I wore a plain gray dress that whispered dignity without wealth, paired with my grandmother's pearls, just enough elegance to suggest tradition, not extravagance. My hair was set, my makeup soft, my posture modest. I was ready to be ignored, because when no one's looking at you, you get to look at everyone. And I looked. I watched Marcus glide from guest to guest like a seasoned politician. He had different smiles for different people. Charm turned up to 11 for the rich ones, polite disinterest for the rest. He complimented loudly, laughed strategically, and avoided eye contact with anyone who didn't serve his ambitions, including me. Until the cocktail hour, he found me behind my floral fortress. "Mrs. Hartley," he said with that voice dipped in charm. "Isn't this magical?" I nodded. "Absolutely enchanting," I replied. "Almost like a dream you design yourself." He didn't catch the edge in my tone, or maybe he chose not to. "We really should spend more time together," he said, leaning closer. "I'd love to get to know you better." Now, that was interesting. Most people get to know their in-laws before the vows, not after. But Marcus wasn't most people. He wasn't interested in me as a person. He was interested in me as a possibility. I agreed to dinner, smiled, pretended to be flattered. I knew exactly what he was doing, and I wanted to see how far he'd go. Dinner was set for Thursday. He picked a restaurant downtown, one of those sleek, overpriced places where the waiters act like you've inconvenienced their art just by showing up. The kind of place meant to impress or intimidate. I wore a black dress. Simple, respectful. The kind that made me look respectable but not wealthy. I wore Robert's old watch, the broken one he never threw away. It still looked expensive at a distance. Just like me. He stood when I arrived. "Sylvia, you look radiant," he said. I smiled like an old lady flattered by the attention. "Thank you, dear," I replied. "This place certainly is something." He ordered wine. Something with too many syllables and too much ego. He poured it with a flourish, like a man preparing for a performance. And oh, what a performance it was. He asked about my life, about how I was managing on my own, about how hard it must be, maintaining a house, handling finances, dealing with loneliness. I answered politely, carefully. "Oh, I keep myself busy," I said. "I dust Robert's old books, tend the roses, and argue with the thermostat when it thinks it knows better than I do." He laughed, a fake corporate laugh, practiced, polished, hollow. And then he leaned in. "I've been working with an attorney," he said, "who helps elderly clients with, protective measures. Things like power of attorney, financial safeguards, medical decisions. Just in case something ever happened." There it was, the proposal. He slid a manila folder across the table like it was a gift. "It's nothing complicated," he assured me. "Just simple paperwork. It would let Emma and me take care of things for you if you ever need help." I opened it, slowly, like I was reading a foreign language. Power of attorney, full financial oversight, medical authority, living arrangements, everything, every piece of my life. I looked at him. He was watching me like a hawk watches a rabbit. I closed the folder. "This is quite comprehensive," I said. He smiled. "It's just a precaution." "How thoughtful," I murmured. He mistook my composure for confusion. "Really, Sylvia, this is just about protecting you. From people who might take advantage, contractors, scam artists, maybe even relatives. Relatives." Huh. That one almost made me laugh. I asked him if Emma knew. "Of course," he said. "She thinks it's brilliant." I doubted that. Emma was many things, but ruthless wasn't one of them. I told him I'd think it over. "I'd like my own lawyer to look it through," I said, with a sweet, grandmotherly smile. His face didn't change, but his eyes did. Just for a flicker, a glitch in the mask. "You brought a notary, didn't you?" I asked casually. He blinked. "How did you know?" he asked. "Lucky guess," I replied. "You seem like someone who plans ahead." He laughed nervously. "Of course, but take all the time you need." I nodded. "Of course I will." What I didn't tell him was that the moment I got home, I made a phone call. The number Robert had left me, a lawyer, a very good one, with instructions. He'd been waiting for my call for 2 years. We didn't wait long. Marcus called again the next day, then Emma, then Marcus again. Always polite, always curious, just wondering if you had a chance to review those papers. I smiled into the phone, still thinking, "Dear, it's all so overwhelming." They bought it. What they didn't know was that while Marcus was plotting his takeover, I was preparing a trap. My house was rewired with hidden cameras and microphones. The documents had been flagged for fraud. The notary, we learned, had a history of signing shady deals. And me, I practiced my lines, rehearsed my role, a fragile widow, overwhelmed, grateful for Marcus's guidance, ready to sign. It would all go down Monday. And Marcus, he had no idea that by Tuesday morning, his face would be on the news and his fingerprints on a federal indictment. Monday arrived with the kind of quiet tension that reminds you something is about to break. I woke up early, showered, and made a pot of strong coffee. Not because I needed it, but because rituals matter on the days you go to war. At exactly 2:47 p.m., Marcus texted, "See you at 3. Bringing everything." Everything. That word meant something different to him than it did to me. To him, everything was control. My finances. My house. My decisions. My future. My freedom. To me, everything meant something else. Evidence, leverage, justice. I wore the same black dress, the one from dinner. Familiarity breeds comfort, and I wanted Marcus relaxed, confident. I tucked my hair behind my ears, kept my jewelry minimal, and set the table just as he would expect: 2 glasses, 1 pen, 1 anxious widow. I even made tea. The knock came at 3:01. He arrived in a tailored blazer, his smile slick and sincere. Behind him, the notary, a woman in her 50s, quiet, eyes already scanning the room. She knew why she was here. She just didn't know who was really pulling the strings. "Thank you for meeting on short notice," Marcus said. "Of course," I replied gently. "It's been weighing on me." He smiled like a lion seeing a lamb finally limp. He placed the folder on my coffee table with practiced ease. "We'll just go through the main sections," he said, flipping pages. "Nothing too complicated. This gives Emma and me the ability to assist you with day-to-day matters, like paying bills, yes, and managing assets, and medical decisions, if necessary, I repeated, as though I hadn't read the entire folder 3 times with a team of lawyers. He continued, "This section here allows us to make investment choices. In case anything happens to you suddenly, we want to ensure continuity." Continuity. He said it like he was planning a company merger. He handed me the pen. I held it between my fingers for a moment, let my hand tremble just slightly. Not too much, just enough to make me seem unsure, vulnerable. "This is quite overwhelming," I said. "I know," Marcus replied, voice soft. "But trust me, this is for the best. Trust him." That was rich. I signed the first page, slowly. Then I paused. "Marcus, yes, what happens to my money after this?" He blinked, just for a moment. The notary didn't flinch, but Marcus did. Barely. "Your money will be professionally managed," he said, smoothly. "No more stress about accounts or paperwork. By you, well, by both of us. Emma and I." "I see." I signed the second page, then stopped again. "And if I change my mind..." Marcus hesitated. "That would depend," he said carefully. "Some of these arrangements are designed to be permanent, to avoid confusion later." "Confusion," I said. He nodded. "Sometimes families misunderstand intentions. This just avoids complications." I signed the third page. Then I set the pen down. "Marcus," I said softly, "there's something I didn't mention." He smiled. "Of course. What is it? I think there might be more money than you realize." His pupils dilated. "Oh, yes," I said. "Robert may have had accounts I didn't know about. Investments, stocks, hidden things." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "How much more money? Would you say?" I looked at the notary, then back at him. "Enough," I said, and then I smiled and said the words I had rehearsed all weekend. "You're under arrest, Marcus." He blinked. "What, you have the right to remain silent," came a voice from behind the bookshelf. 3 officers stepped out from the guest room, badges raised, faces serious. The notary stepped back, startled. Marcus went pale. You set me up," he whispered. "No," I said, standing. "You set yourself up." I just let you finish the script." One of the officers pulled the signed documents from the table, placed them in an evidence bag. Marcus's voice cracked. "This is entrapment. This," I replied, "is justice. They read him his rights." He didn't argue. Not really. He just stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Like the woman he thought was harmless had pulled off a magic trick he didn't know existed, and she had. Because I wasn't just protecting myself, I was opening a door to something much, much bigger. That evening, the news hit the local channels. Prominent businessman arrested in elder fraud sting operation. They showed Marcus being led away in cuffs, still trying to keep his face neutral, still performing, but the audience had changed, and the applause was gone. Emma called me in tears. "What did you do?" "Mom." "What I had to," I replied. "But he's my husband, and he tried to rob your mother." She went quiet. "You don't know that," she said softly. "I do. I didn't yell, didn't cry, just told her the truth. There's a moment in every storm where the wind stops just long enough for you to hear what's been rattling loose. This was that moment for Emma. "I need to see you," she whispered. "Come tomorrow." She showed up in sweatpants and old mascara. She looked younger and older at the same time. She walked into the kitchen and sat down like she couldn't trust the floor. "I don't understand," she said. "I know." I handed her the audio file, the one from our dinner, the one where Marcus offered to protect me from myself. She listened, quietly, all the way through. When it ended, she didn't say anything for a full minute. Then she asked, "Was any of it real?" And I said, "What you felt was real. What he did with it wasn't." Her tears came slowly, not loud, just steady. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Why didn't you tell me about the money?" I looked her in the eyes. "Because I wanted you to choose love, not leverage." She nodded. Once, then she stood up and walked to the door. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I know, sweetheart." She left, and I let her go. Because sometimes, truth needs silence to settle. Over the next week, everything moved quickly. The authorities searched Marcus's accounts, his contacts, his old partnerships. Turns out, this wasn't his first attempt. There were others, older women, always widows, always with assets. He'd played this game before, only this time, he lost. And not just his freedom, he lost his mask, his reputation, his entire future. And in that loss, I found something else, a mission. Because Robert hadn't just left me a fortune, he'd left me a responsibility. A few days after Marcus was arrested, I stood in my kitchen holding the key to Robert's old safe. It was heavy, not just physically, but with everything it meant. For 2 years, I hadn't touched that safe, not because I forgot it. I couldn't. It was hidden behind the wall panel in Robert's study, disguised to look like part of the concrete. Robert always had a knack for making big things disappear. I didn't open it before because I wasn't ready to confront what was inside. Grief fogs judgment. Pain steals clarity. But now I needed clarity more than ever. The safe clicked open slowly. Like it, too, had been waiting for this moment. Inside was an orderly stack of documents, notebooks, investment portfolios, bank statements, trust papers. And at the very bottom, an envelope with my name in Robert's handwriting. Sylvia. No dearest, no my love, just my name. Direct, intentional, just like him. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, the letter read, If you're reading this, someone has tried to take what I built for you. I'm sorry. I wish I could have warned you in person, but I knew you'd face this alone. So I did what I do best, I prepared. There's 33 million fully protected. No one can touch it but you. I kept it hidden so you'd be safe. You always trusted too easily. That's your gift and your weakness. I loved you for both. There's a business card in this envelope. Carol Peterson. She's your lawyer now. She knows what to do. Don't let anyone guilt you. Don't let anyone gaslight you. And whatever happens, don't let anyone take your power. Use the money however you want. But if someone tried to take it from you, use every penny to make them regret it. I sat down in Robert's chair, the letter trembling in my lap. 33 million. That number didn't even feel real. But the emotion behind it that was real, that was love, sharpened into strategy. The next morning, I called Carol, Mrs. Hartley. She said before I could even introduce myself, I've been waiting 2 years for your call. We met that afternoon. Her office wasn't like the ones you see on TV, no oak panels, no heavy bookshelves. It was bright, minimal, functional, efficient. She looked to be in her early 50s, with sharp eyes and a handshake like a vice. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Robert told me you'd come when someone tried to manipulate you, she said. He was right, I replied. She laid everything out on the table literally. The trust Robert had established, the protections built into it, the contingencies he'd created in case anyone tried to gain access through coercion, deception, or manipulation. And then she said the words that hit me like a lightning bolt. Even if you had signed Marcus's documents, she explained, he wouldn't have gotten a dime. What I asked, stunned. Your husband created an irrevocable trust. It separates your personal authority from asset control. Even with power of attorney, Marcus couldn't have touched the money, not without triggering alerts and legal blocks. I sat back, trying to process what I'd just heard. So, I was never really in danger. She looked at me, not financially, but emotionally, legally, mentally. Yes. And that's why Robert set this up to protect more than your bank account, to protect your freedom. I exhaled slowly, and now Carol smiled. Now, we fight back. She wasn't bluffing. Within days, she'd built a case file thicker than a dictionary. Surveillance footage, audio recordings, bank activity, witness statements from other elderly women Marcus had targeted in the past. Apparently, Marcus wasn't just a manipulative son-in-law. He was part of something much bigger, a network, a pattern. And we had the map. The authorities began digging, quietly, deeply. One name led to another. One transaction led to 5. And every breadcrumb led further into the dark. And just like that, I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a weapon. That weekend, Emma visited again. She looked exhausted. I filed for divorce, she said, eyes glassy. I can't stay married to someone who tried to rob you. I nodded, quietly. She continued. I feel stupid. I saw the signs. I just didn't want to believe them. Belief is a beautiful thing, I told her. But it's dangerous when we lend it to the wrong people. She sat in silence for a moment, then said, I want to help. You already have, I replied. And she had, because Emma's heartbreak gave this story more weight, more consequence, more truth. This wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal, family, justice. Marcus's trial was set to begin in September, but before that, we had work to do. Carol and I began reaching out to prosecutors. advocacy groups, financial watchdogs. We found others like me, elderly people who had been groomed, gaslit, manipulated. Some had lost everything. Some didn't survive long enough to fight back. We decided that had to change. We took Robert's money and started something new. A legal protection initiative for elder fraud victims, free attorneys, surveillance equipment, financial consultations, emergency response teams. Within a month, we'd opened investigations in 3 different states. By the end of the second month, we'd arrested 17 people, and every single one of them had used the same tactics Marcus had used on me. I'm just here to help. But now, we were helping ourselves. We became the ones knocking on doors. We became the warning. Word spread fast in the underground. There's a widow out there who fights back. She has money, lawyers, investigators, and she's not afraid of anyone. They started calling me the Hartley problem. I liked that. Emma started sleeping better, smiling more. She even moved back to town and got an apartment not far from mine. We had dinner on my porch one night. The air was cool. Autumn was arriving. I still don't know how you saw it, she said. I didn't, I replied. Not at first. I just listened and waited. Predators always show themselves if you give them room. She sipped her wine. What happens now, I looked out at the street. Now, we stop pretending people like Marcus are rare. They're not. They're everywhere. And we make sure they know we're watching. She smiled. A small one? But it was enough. The trial began 2 weeks later. Marcus's lawyer tried everything. Diminished capacity, misunderstood intentions, compassionate concern gone wrong, but the evidence was brutal. They played the recordings in court. Every word, every trick, every lie. When the audio reached the part where Marcus told me that changing my mind might not be possible due to my mental capacity, the entire courtroom shifted. Even the judge looked like he wanted to throw a book. The jury took 47 minutes. Guilty. On all counts. The sentence: 18 years in federal prison. No parole. Marcus would be in his 50s before he saw the outside world again, if he saw it at all. He looked at me as they led him away, eyes hollow, rage-filled, defeated. "This isn't over," he hissed, and I smiled. "It is for you." After the trial, the silence in my house felt different. Not like grief, not like loneliness, but like clarity. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't waiting for the next threat to show up in disguise. I wasn't scanning smiles for sharp edges. I wasn't pretending to be smaller than I was. I could breathe. But breathing wasn't enough anymore. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what I'd survived. Marcus Thornfield may have been my personal wake-up call, but the problem was never just Marcus. He was a symptom, a warning flare. One con man in a suit among hundreds, maybe thousands who made their living convincing elderly people they needed help. And I had money, resources, time. I decided to use all 3. Carol and I met the following week to discuss what came next. We sat in her office, sipping coffee, surrounded by stacks of case files from people who'd heard about the trial and started reaching out. Some had been swindled out of retirement funds. Others had lost their homes, their identities, even their children's trust. Most had never told anyone until now. "Do you know what they all have in common?" I asked. Carol looked up. "They all thought it was their fault," I said. She nodded slowly. "Shame keeps people silent. Silence protects predators." then we're going to make some noise. And we did. We used a portion of Robert's trust, $5 million, to launch the first nationwide elder fraud response program. We hired lawyers, trained advocates, worked with local law enforcement. We partnered with banks and retirement centers. We created hotlines, mobile teams, and legal workshops. We didn't wait for victims to come to us. We found them. By the end of the first month, we had opened investigations in 12 states. By the end of the second, 17 people had been arrested. By the third, that number doubled. I wasn't doing this quietly anymore. I gave interviews, spoke on panels, appeared on morning shows, podcasts, financial roundtables. I didn't want to be famous, but I did want to be visible. Because visibility is armor, and the one thing predators hate most is attention. Emma helped with the program too. At first, she worked in logistics paperwork, scheduling, planning, but over time, she found her voice. She started hosting seminars for adult children of aging parents. She spoke about red flags, financial transparency, legal boundaries, emotional manipulation. She spoke as someone who had loved a predator and missed all the signs. She didn't hide her story. She weaponized it. And in doing so, she healed. One afternoon, Carol called me. "You've got a visitor." She said, "Federal." I raised an eyebrow. "Good kind or bad kind?" "Very good. She wants to meet you." Agent Sarah Torres walked into Carol's office dressed like business and spoke like justice. She carried a folder thick with documents and a voice filled with purpose. "Mrs. Hartley," she said, "your case changed how we look at elder fraud. Most of the time, we treat it like a personal tragedy. But what you exposed, it's organized. It's coordinated. It's industrial." She opened her folder. "Would you be willing to help us take this national?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. She asked what I needed. Power. I replied. And a budget. Within a month, the Department of Justice had launched the Elder Integrity Task Force. I was listed as its founding civilian advisor. We called it the Hartley Program. I didn't name it. They did. And now, predators had something new to fear. A name, a system, a force. We expanded into 30 states within 6 months. By the end of the year, we'd recovered over 40 million in stolen assets. 40 million. That number echoed, because it meant we weren't just reacting anymore, we were repairing. And then something I never expected happened. The White House called. They wanted to award me the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I sat in my kitchen after the call, the receiver still warm in my hand, staring out the window at the roses I'd planted the year Robert died. Back then, those roses were grief therapy. Now, they were something else. Proof. Proof that something broken can grow again. That beauty doesn't mean weakness. That silence doesn't mean surrender. Emma came with me to the ceremony. We stood in the East Room of the White House surrounded by scientists, artists, activists, and me, a widow in navy blue, wearing Robert's anniversary earrings and a quiet, defiant smile. The president handed me the medal for her extraordinary contributions to justice and elder protection. He said, "Mrs. Hartley has proven that one voice, backed by courage and conviction, can reshape the system." As I stepped to the podium, I didn't speak like a celebrity or a politician. I spoke like a woman who had been underestimated one too many times. 2 years ago, I said, someone tried to steal my future. They failed because I was ready. Because my husband prepared me. Because I stopped believing that being polite meant being powerless. I paused. And to anyone watching, anyone targeting people like me, I have one message: we're not prey. We're predators now. You just didn't notice the teeth. The room erupted, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was legacy. After the ceremony, Emma and I sat in the hotel lounge, sipping wine. "Do you think Dad would be proud?" she asked. I looked at her. I think he always knew who I was. I just didn't. She nodded, then smiled and said, "You've become something terrifying." I raised my glass to making predators extinct, and we toasted, not just to justice, but to reinvention. It's a strange thing, watching fear shift direction. For so long, people like me were the ones afraid to answer the phone, afraid to open the door, afraid to ask questions, because the answers always made us feel foolish. But not anymore. Now, they were the ones watching their backs. Marcus may have been the first, but he was far from the last. Within 6 months of launching the Hartley program, we'd traced networks operating in 15 states, shell companies, forged documents, fake caregivers, legal instruments used like weapons, and always the same victims, elderly people who'd spent decades building lives, only to be robbed of them by someone with a charming smile and a notarized folder. One by one, those operations crumbled. Carol and I met weekly, our files growing thicker, our impact expanding wider. Agent Torres sent regular updates from Washington, her voice buzzing with urgency and pride. "You're making them scared to breathe," she said one morning, laughing. "They're actually using your name like a threat. We've intercepted messages warning each other not to pull a Hartley." I didn't laugh, because it wasn't funny. It was necessary. We didn't just want arrests. We wanted prevention. We wanted the predators to know that their target could be their undoing. And for the first time, they started second-guessing themselves. Meanwhile, something else began to happen, something unexpected. Letters, emails, handwritten notes. They came from all over the country, from women and men in their 60s, 70s, even 90s. Some had been scammed. Some had stopped it just in time. Some had watched it happen to a parent, a sibling, a friend. Some just wanted to say thank you. But one letter stood out. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, written in blue pen on lined notebook paper. "Dear Mrs. Hartley, you don't know me, but your story saved my life. My daughter's boyfriend convinced me to co-sign on a loan, said it was for her, but the paperwork didn't feel right. I remembered what you said in that interview. Don't confuse charm for character. I didn't sign." He left the next day. Turns out he had a record. I still have my house because of you. Thank you. Sincerely, Virginia L., Michigan. I kept that letter in my kitchen drawer next to the tea bags, because sometimes, when the world feels like it's still tilting the wrong way, it helps to remember that you already pushed it in the right direction once, and you can do it again. A few weeks later, we got the call that changed everything. "Mrs. Hartley," Agent Torres said. Her voice clipped but electric. "We just arrested Marcus's mentor?" I blinked. His what? His uncle, William Thornfield. Been running elder fraud operations across state lines for over 20 years. Fake investment firms, senior relocation scams, legal coercion. We believe he taught Marcus everything. I sat down. How many victims? Over 100, maybe more. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I asked, how long will he go away for? With the charges we've filed, he's looking at life in prison. Life. It didn't bring me joy, but it did bring closure. I looked at the framed photo of Robert on my shelf. He would have hated all this attention, but he would have been proud because his plan didn't just protect me, it helped destroy an entire criminal lineage. A week later, Emma and I walked into a community center in Ohio to launch our newest regional advocacy hub. It was our 7th. The room was packed. People with walkers, people with canes, veterans, teachers, grandparents, people who'd lived through wars, raised families, and been told by society, by banks, by scammers that they were too old to understand what was happening to them. We told them the truth. They weren't helpless. They'd just been lied to. I watched one woman in the front row, mid-80s, gray curls, trembling hands wipe tears from her eyes as she listened to the presentation. Afterward, she came up to me and said, "I've been afraid to answer my phone for years, but tonight, I'm calling my grandson. I'm not scared anymore." That's what mattered. Not headlines, not medals. That moment, that courage, that voice rising again. A few days later, Carol came by with a stack of reports and a bottle of wine. "Big news," she said, pouring us each a glass. "Marcus is cooperating." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, apparently. 18 years sounded longer once the cell door closed. He's flipped, giving up everything: names, methods, operations in other states." I swirled my wine. "And what does he want in return?" "Time off his sentence." "How much, 8 years?" "Maybe 10 with good behavior." I didn't answer right away. I thought about all the people he hurt, about Emma, about me, about how close he came to stealing my entire life with a smile and a fountain pen. Then I said, "Let him talk. Just make sure he serves enough time to remember it." Carol nodded. "Consider it handled." The following week, we got confirmation that Marcus's cooperation had helped expose networks in 12 more states. Total recovery so far, $80 million, 51 arrests, hundreds of victims finally getting some version of their lives back. And still, we weren't done. We launched a fund fueled by asset forfeiture and private donations for victims who couldn't recover what they lost. It wasn't charity. It was restitution. It was dignity. It was power returned. Emma began coordinating survivor retreats, weekend gatherings where victims could share stories, learn about legal tools, and most importantly, remember that they weren't alone. She was good at it. She'd found her fire. One night, after everyone had gone home, she sat next to me on the porch and asked, "Do you ever miss the quiet?" I looked at her. "No," I said. The quiet was where predators operated. I like the noise better. It means we're awake now. And we were. We were loud, organized, and very, very dangerous to the kind of people who'd once called us targets. Legislative change takes time. That's what they told me. Too many systems, too many committees, too many people saying, "We'll look into it," when what they really meant was, "We'll wait until you get tired." But I wasn't tired. I was just getting started. Agent Torres called me one morning in early spring. "Congress is holding hearings," she said. "They want you to testify." I nodded slowly. "About what?" "About making elder fraud a federal crime with life imprisonment as a possible sentence." I didn't say anything at first. Then I said, "Tell them I'll be there." The hearing room in DEC felt like a marble museum, white pillars, velvet seats, cameras tucked into corners like curious cats. The room was cold, formal, meant to intimidate, but I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. I wore a navy suit, simple and sharp, Robert's old watch on one wrist, the Medal of Freedom pinned at my shoulder, not for vanity, for message. I belonged here. I sat at the long table, hands folded, heart steady. "Mrs. Hartley," Senator Williams said, adjusting his microphone. "We're honored to have you. Would you please begin your statement?" I nodded and leaned forward. 2 years ago, I said, my daughter got married, and I became a target. They listened. I told them everything. How Marcus tried to steal my life with a smile, how he used charm as a scalpel, how the law, at the time, would have protected him more than me if I hadn't been prepared. I told them how Robert had built a defense I didn't even know I had. I told them about the others, dozens, then hundreds who weren't as lucky. And then I paused. Stealing money from an elderly person isn't just theft. I said, it's robbery of their freedom, their confidence, their ability to trust. It's a slow erasure of everything they spent a lifetime building. I looked directly into the cameras, and it deserves consequences that match the damage. One senator raised his hand. "Mrs. Hartley, some say life imprisonment is too harsh for financial crimes. What do you say to that?" I didn't flinch. I say, if you steal $10 from a stranger, it's a crime. But if you convince an 82-year-old woman to sign away her house, her bank accounts, and her medical rights because she trusts you, that's not just fraud, that's predation. And predators don't stop until someone stops them. The hearing room went silent. Then one senator leaned forward. "What would you say to elderly Americans watching this?" I smiled. "I'd say being old doesn't make you weak. Being polite doesn't make you powerless. And if someone tries to treat you like prey, you can bite back." That line made the news that night. But I didn't care about ratings. I cared about results. 3 days after the hearing, the Elder Financial Protection and Justice Act passed committee review. The vote was unanimous. 2 weeks later, it passed the Senate floor with bipartisan support. Life imprisonment became a sentencing option for high-value, multi-state elder fraud. Predators weren't just looking at fines anymore. They were looking at decades. And word spread fast. Our hotline received 3,000 calls the following month. Survivors, whistleblowers, bank employees who finally felt like they could speak up. And we answered every call. Meanwhile, Marcus's parole hearing approached. He had served just over 5 years. Under federal law, he was eligible for early review. Carol called me, cautious. "You're allowed to give a victim impact statement," she said. "Good." I replied, "I have a few things to say." The room was smaller than the courtroom, less ceremony, more consequence. Marcus sat in a plain jumpsuit, older, thinner, eyes dull. He didn't look at me when I entered. He didn't have to. I could feel his tension from across the room. His lawyer made the usual pitch model inmate, rehabilitation, no longer a threat. Then they called me forward. I stood and faced the board. 5 years ago, this man tried to take everything from me. I said, he called it protection, but it was predation dressed in concern. And I was one signature away from losing my autonomy, my assets, and my dignity. I paused. He didn't just target me. He built a pattern. And if I hadn't stopped him, he would have kept going. Then I looked directly at Marcus. "Have you learned anything?" He stared for a moment. Then, voice flat, he said, "I've learned some people have more money than they deserve." The room went still. I turned back to the board. No further statement. I think that says it all. They denied his parole in under 30 minutes. He wouldn't be eligible again for 3 more years. As I walked out of the facility, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt confirmed. Because some people don't change, but the world around them can. That summer, I got a call from Patricia Marcus's mother. She wanted to meet out of curiosity. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, far from the spotlight. She wore pearls and perfume and grief like layers of armor. "I'm not here to apologize," she said. "I didn't expect you to," I replied. She looked down. "We lost everything? The house, the family name, even our charity foundation." "I know," I said. "And now you're some kind of national hero." I looked her in the eye. I never wanted to be anything. I just didn't want to be a victim. She nodded slowly. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "He was always good at lying. I just thought it was charm." We sat in silence for a while. Then she stood. "Goodbye, Sylvia. Goodbye, Patricia." And just like that, the last thread of that old life unraveled. Marcus's legacy wouldn't be generational, but mine might be. Because what started with one sting operation had become something else entirely. A movement, a warning, a shield, and I intended to keep sharpening it. It started with an email from Geneva. The subject line read, "Invitation to speak United Nations Forum on Aging and Exploitation." I blinked at the screen. United Nations. I wasn't a diplomat. I wasn't a politician. I was a retired teacher, a widow with a voice and a spine and a story that happened to land like lightning. But Carol said it best. They don't want a figurehead. They want someone real. So I said yes. And 2 months later, I stood at a podium in a hall filled with translators, economists, human rights attorneys, and elders from 38 nations. Exploitation, I told them, doesn't need a weapon. It just needs access, trust, and time. I paused. And silence. Don't forget silence. That's what makes predators invisible. The room listened in 10 different languages. I shared what we'd built in the U. How the Hartley Initiative had helped launch a network of legal, financial, and psychological defenses that stretched across 40 states. How survivor-led outreach programs had brought hope where there had been only shame. How justice wasn't just reactive, now it was proactive. And then I said something I hadn't planned. This isn't just about catching criminals. It's about changing the story we tell about getting older. Aging isn't decline. It's data. It's depth. It's strategy. A woman from South Korea came up to me afterward, translator in tow. My mother was scammed 5 years ago. She said, she's never smiled since. I think she will now. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just an American problem. This was human. And that meant the solution had to be human too. We returned home and expanded. We created multilingual materials, survivor guidebooks in 10 languages, cross-border coordination tools. We partnered with law enforcement agencies in Canada, the UK, Australia, Germany, South Korea, because con artists don't care about borders, so neither would we. Emma took over as Director of Education. She created curriculum modules for high schools and universities, financial literacy focused on elder protection, power of attorney awareness, and psychological manipulation tactics. If we raise smarter children, she told me one night, we raise safer parents. She was right. By year 3, we'd trained over 70,000 volunteers, built a full digital learning hub, and helped pass elder protection laws in 6 additional countries. I still lived in the same house, still made tea every morning, still talked to Robert, sometimes out loud, like he was in the next room reading the paper. You should see what we've done. I'd say, you wouldn't believe it. But the truth was, he would. Because he saw it before anyone else. The world began to notice. News profiles, magazine covers, a documentary team from PBS followed our work for 6 months. They titled it, The Widow Who Fought Back: How One Woman Changed the Rules. I didn't like being on camera, but I liked what it showed. A woman walking into a courtroom, a man in cuffs, a line of people at a seminar learning how to read their bank statements with power instead of panic. A new kind of hero. Quiet, sharp, tired. Maybe, but unshakable. Then, one day, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, from a federal prison in Illinois. I recognized the name on the envelope before I even opened it. Marcus. I stared at it for a while. Thought about burning it. Then I didn't. Because I wanted to know what a man like that had to say after everything. Inside was a single page. No apology. No remorse. Just these words, I used to think you were weak. Turns out, you were just silent. Silence can be the scariest thing in the world when it's thinking. You were always thinking, weren't you? That was it. No return address. Just an echo. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer next to Virginia's thank you note, a reminder of what silence can become when it finally speaks. In year 4, we hosted our first global summit, not in Washington, not in New York, but in Des Moines, Iowa. Because that's where the first Hartley Survivor Network chapter launched without us. We didn't build it. A group of retired nurses and teachers did. They created a support group in the basement of a church. No staff, no funding, just coffee, printed pamphlets, and truth. They called themselves the Quiet Storm. We flew out to meet them. There were 12 women, all over 65. Each had been conned or nearly conned. Each had turned their story into someone else's shield. They had logged more calls and flagged more scam attempts than our professional hotline in 3 months. I guess we're just hard to fool now, one of them joked, and I believed her. We gave them full funding the next day, and then we replicated their model. By year 5, The Quiet Storm had 114 chapters globally. Real people protecting each other. No capes, no slogans, just vigilance with a cup of tea. At our annual conference that year, I gave a closing speech. I didn't talk about numbers, or laws, or even Marcus. I talked about memory. How we treat the elderly, I said, is how we treat our future selves. If we allow them to be erased financially, emotionally, spiritually, we've already lost our way. But if we protect them, if we lift them, we get to inherit something better than money. We get to inherit wisdom that survived. The room stood up before I finished the last line. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift in my chest, a kind of peace, a kind of release, like the work wasn't finished, but the purpose had fully arrived. The thing about legacy is, you don't always get to choose how it starts, but you can choose how it ends. Year 5 marked a turning point for me, not because the headlines changed, but because I did. I'd spent so long fighting that I forgot how to rest. My calendar was booked 6 months out. Speaking engagements, legal briefings, survivor summits, interviews, dinners with legislators. People called me the Iron Widow. I didn't hate it, but I started waking up tired. Not just body tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that whispers, "You've done enough. Let the next ones rise." That voice didn't feel like surrender. It felt like evolution. Emma noticed before I did. She invited me to dinner, just the two of us. Cooked something simple, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, broccoli with lemon. "Why do I feel like this is an ambush?" I joked as I sat down. "It's not," she said. "But if it were, it'd be the softest one you've ever experienced." We ate quietly for a while. Then she said, "You can let go. You know that, right?" I didn't answer, so she kept going. "You started something huge, bigger than even Dad could have imagined. But you don't have to carry it forever." I put my fork down. "I'm not done." I said, "I didn't say you were," she replied. "I said you can rest. There's a difference." That night, I sat in Robert's study, the same room where I found the letter that started all this. I opened the safe again, even though there was nothing new inside, just old files, copies of trust documents, the keys that unlocked my second life. And I thought, how do you step back from something that's become who you are? The answer came a week later in the form of a manila envelope. It arrived by courier. No sender, just my name, written neatly in black ink. Inside was a will, Marcus Thornfield's. I stared at it for a long time before opening. It was real, legally stamped, dated 3 weeks prior. And at the top of the second page, I saw something that made my heart stutter. I, Marcus David Thornfield, leave the following assets, in full, to the Hartley Initiative to be used in furtherance of elder protection, outreach, and legal education. Below was a list of properties, patents, and royalties, estimated value $3.2 million. No notes, no explanation, just surrender. I didn't tell Emma at first. I wanted to sit with it. Not because it softened what he'd done, but because it showed something I hadn't expected from him. Awareness. Maybe even regret. Carol verified everything. It was all clean, untouchable, structured in a way that we could use it freely. And so we did. We launched a sub-program using his assets' irony fully intact and named it the Second Chance Fund, designed to support perpetrators of elder fraud who turned themselves in voluntarily, cooperated with prosecutors, and committed to long-term restorative justice work. We didn't advertise it much, but it worked. In the first year, 25 individuals stepped forward. Some confessed to crimes with no paper trail, some handed over stolen funds, some even joined the initiative, helping victims navigate the same traps they'd once helped build. It didn't absolve them, but it transformed them. And that mattered. Redemption doesn't undo pain, but sometimes it plants something better in its place. By the 6th anniversary of the initiative, I'd written a memoir. Emma helped with the editing. Carol handled the legal reviews. We called it The Safe House Silence Became My Strategy. It wasn't a bestseller, but it sold enough to fund 2 new survivor shelters in Louisiana and Colorado. And more importantly, it told the truth about what happened, about who we were, and about the power of preparedness, emotional, legal, and psychological. In the final chapter, I wrote this: there's nothing noble about being quiet in the face of evil, but there is power in watching, in waiting. in knowing that when the time comes, you don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to speak clearly and mean it. The audiobook was voiced by Emma. Her voice sounded stronger than I'd ever heard it. Calm, measured, unshakable. She'd become what I always hoped she would. Not fearless, but ferociously aware. One afternoon, we took a walk through the city park. It was early fall. Leaves crisp, air clean. We passed a bench with a plaque on it that read, "To those who protected others, even when they were the ones hurting most." Emma stopped. "That quote's yours," she said. "I know." I smiled. Someone must have liked it. I think more than someone did. A few feet away, an elderly man helped his wife with her coat. A teenager held his grandmother's hand while reading something on her phone. A woman in her 70s sat under a tree with a group of college kids, showing them how to review legal contracts. These weren't scenes, they were outcomes. And I realized maybe it was okay to let the movement grow without me in the center of it, because legacy doesn't require presence, just intention. They say you know when it's time, not because there's a grand sign or a final warning, but because something inside you gets quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means you're shrinking, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed. That's how it felt. By year 7, the Hartley Initiative was global, fully funded, staffed, structured. Survivors were leading chapters. Young women were studying law because they saw what Emma had built. Entire nations were drafting elder protection laws based on our model. And me, I was walking slower, reading more, smiling at strangers in the grocery store without wondering if they were trying to sell me something. It felt earned. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the oaks outside my window, I opened a fresh sheet of paper and began writing what would be my last letter. Not because anything was wrong, but because everything, finally, felt right. I wrote it with no title, no legal signature, just a voice mind talking to whoever found it after I was gone. If you're reading this, then my work is done. Not finished, just passed on. I was a quiet woman once. I mistook silence for grace, politeness for protection, and fear for wisdom. And then I learned silence is only sacred when it's chosen. Otherwise, it's a leash. To the woman who finds this and wonders if she's next, know this. You can be polite and powerful. You can be soft and strategic. You can love deeply and still say no. And if someone tries to shrink your voice, your body, or your freedom, you do not owe them softness. You owe yourself protection. Let your story be strategy. Let your pain become a tool. And if you're lucky enough to be underestimated, use it. They'll never see you coming, but they'll remember when you arrive. I folded the letter and slipped it into a box alongside my favorite scarf, a black and white photograph of Robert and me from 1979 and a printed copy of Virginia's thank you letter from Michigan. I labeled the box simply Strategy. Carol came by the next week for tea. We sat on the porch, 2 women with 100 years of wisdom between them, watching the world pass by without urgency. I've updated the estate plan. I told her. Everything's going to the foundation. Even the house she asked. I nodded. They can use it for recovery housing, or burn it down and rebuild it. Doesn't matter. I don't need to be a ghost in the walls. She smiled. Most people cling harder when they know the end is near. I'm not most people, I said, sipping my tea. She nodded. No, you're not. Emma visited later that week. She didn't know about the letter or the box. Or the fact that I'd quietly recorded over 50 video messages for future survivors, each one personalized to different situations. A virtual compass for women walking through storms I hoped they'd never have to face. But if they did, they'd have my voice in their ear. "You've done enough," Emma told me again, and for the first time, I believed her. The day I died was ordinary. No drama. No final gasp, just a quiet morning, coffee, sunrise, a short walk around the garden, and then a nap I didn't wake from. Peaceful, they said, and I hope it was. But more important than how I died was how I lived, especially at the end, not as a relic, not as a victim, but as a strategist, as a mother, as a protector. As a woman who took everything meant to break her and built something that couldn't be broken. They held the memorial a week later. Emma gave the eulogy. She read the final letter aloud, the one I wrote with no title. And when she finished, she looked up and said, she wasn't a saint. She was smarter than that. She was sharp. She was deliberate. She never needed applause. She just needed results, and the room stood up, not to cry, but to stand. Because sometimes the best way to mourn a fighter is to become one. Afterward, Emma opened the box labeled strategy. Inside, she found the scarf, the photo, the thank you letter, and a key. Attached was a note in my handwriting. You know what to do with this. But if you hesitate, just ask yourself one question. What would Sylvia Hartley do, and then do it better? Grief is strange when your loss becomes a movement. There was no quiet, no empty house, no long afternoons of sorting through closets or deciding what to do with old sweaters. Instead, there were interviews, tributes, requests from universities, governments, and foundations asking for permission to quote her, to teach her, to name things after her. Emma handled most of it, not with tears, with precision, because she understood better than anyone her mother's greatest fear wasn't death. It was fading into irrelevance, so she made sure that never happened. 1 month after the memorial, the Hartley Initiative announced its global restructuring. Emma Hartley was named CEO. Her first directive, double the Quiet Storm chapters. Her second fund, full scholarships for elderly survivors of financial crimes who wanted to study law, finance, or social work. It was called the Phoenix Scholarship, and within 6 months, 57 survivors all over the age of 60 were back in school. Not to start over, to finish strong. Some studied estate law, others learned digital security. One woman even wrote a textbook on psychological tactics used in scam phone calls. They weren't statistics anymore. They were experts, and the world noticed. The Hartley Doctrine, a set of guiding principles on elder protection policy, was formally adopted by the EU Parliament, the Canadian House of Commons, and the Australian Royal Commission on Aging. Sylvia's name appeared in textbooks, in policy documents, on plaques in legal training centers. But most powerfully, it lived in whispered conversations, in the way a daughter now asked her aging father if he wanted help managing his passwords, in the way a grandson printed out a contract before letting his grandma sign anything, in the way a woman in her 70s now asked, without hesitation, "And what exactly do you mean by that when a banker got too vague?" Her name lived there in those instincts, those questions, those protective pauses. Emma kept her mother's desk exactly the way it was. The chair, the notepad, the black fountain pen. Every morning, she'd sit there for 5 minutes before her day began, not to grieve, to calibrate. What would Sylvia do? And then she'd do it sharper, louder, faster. Carol stayed on as general counsel, but transitioned into mentorship. "I'm too old to fight every fire," she joked, "but I'll teach the next brigade." And she did. They trained new legal advocates from all over the world. Some were victims turned warriors. Others were young idealists. All of them were dangerous in the best way. On the anniversary of Sylvia's passing, Emma launched something new, the Hartley Signal, a global alert system that banks, telecom providers, and government agencies could use to flag suspicious behavior affecting seniors in real time. It saved over $120 million in its first year alone, but more importantly, it saved trust. Because that's what Sylvia understood better than anyone. Fraud doesn't just steal money. It steals belief. Belief in others. Belief in systems. Belief in self. She taught the world how to get that belief back. But perhaps the most profound tribute came from someone unexpected. 1 year after Sylvia's death, the Federal Bureau of Prisons sent a letter addressed to the Hartley Foundation. It was a copy of a statement made by Marcus Thornfield at a restorative justice seminar inside the prison. It read, "I tried to destroy a woman who turned out to be the most strategic mind I've ever encountered. I used to think she was just a mark, a target with money and grief and soft eyes. But she was playing chess while I was still bragging about my checkers game. If I've changed, it's not because I found Jesus or saw the light. It's because I realized I never beat her. Not once. And that does something to a man." The letter ended with a request to have a portion of Marcus's remaining commissary donations redirected to the Second Chance Fund. It wasn't redemption, but it was evolution. And Sylvia believed in that. Emma didn't publicize the letter. She archived it quietly, a footnote in a movement too vast to be defined by one man's remorse. Instead, she focused on the future. Children's books on digital awareness, teen curriculum on financial boundaries, workshops for caregivers on healthy power of attorney practices. Sylvia had built the fortress. Emma was building the next city. And every brick echoed her mother's voice, "Don't confuse silence for weakness. Sometimes it's just patience sharpening its blade." On what would have been Sylvia's 80th birthday, a bronze statue was unveiled in her honor, not in Washington, not at the courthouse, but in a small community garden just 2 blocks from her old home. The plaque read, "Sylvia Hartley, who spoke softly, then struck hard. People left flowers, not roses, hydrangeas, her favorite." That evening, Emma walked through the garden alone. She didn't cry. She smiled and whispered, "Happy birthday. Mom, I'm not done yet." Then she turned and walked into the night, a woman lit not by legacy, but by fire she built herself. The world remembered Sylvia Hartley in headlines, but a real legacy was written in smaller places, in kitchens, in community halls, in rehab centers and college dorm rooms. It was in the way people began to really talk about dignity, not as something fragile to be defended, but as something powerful to be demanded. At a survivor summit in Boston, they passed around a microphone and shared their stories, not their trauma, their victories. Marjorie, 74, had once been coerced into changing her will by a neighbor pretending to care for her. "I thought I was being generous," she said, "but I was being groomed." The room went quiet. Then she added, smiling, "Now I teach a course called How Not to Be a Sucker. Enrollment is full." Everyone laughed and clapped. Then came Daniel, 81, a former aerospace engineer who'd been duped by a fake online investment firm. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a PIN, Certified Elder Advocate. Class of 2.0, I lost $200,000, he said, but I gained a mission. I talk to local high school seniors now. I tell them if you want to impress your grandma, help her understand compound interest. The youngest person in the room was Tasha, 19. She wore a black leather jacket and a Hartley Initiative wristband. My grandma watched every video Sylvia ever made. She said, when she passed, I inherited her library and her voice. So now, I'm studying forensic accounting. There were tears, laughter, a kind of joy that felt hard-earned, like a scar turned metal. At the end of the summit, everyone stood for a moment of silence. But instead of silence, a bell rang. Not loud, just one soft chime. And then a voice recording of Sylvia's played overhead. You were never broken, just waiting to be reminded you were the lock, not the key. No one sat down. They stayed standing, because she had made them stand taller, even in absence, elsewhere. Her impact kept unfolding. In a rural village in Kenya, a group of widows formed an Elder Watch collective. They'd heard about Sylvia from an international aid worker. They wrote her name in chalk on the wall of their meeting hut. Mama Hartley. It read. In Berlin, a tech company created AI scam filters based on transcripts from Sylvia's original deposition. In Tokyo, a retired scam artist turned advocate hosted live streams where he dissected psychological tactics, always ending with the phrase, "Don't let your age be your entry wound." In a juvenile justice program in Detroit, a teenager named Jalen read from Sylvia's memoir as part of his rehabilitation coursework. She sounds like my grandma, he said, except scarier, in a good way. He later went on to intern for the Hartley Initiative's youth outreach arm. Change was no longer theoretical. It was visible, trackable, personal. And it had Sylvia's fingerprints all over it. Back in the U.S., Emma received a letter in the mail. No sender, just a handwritten note tucked inside a folded pamphlet from a local senior center. Dear Miss Hartley, I am not anyone famous, just a woman who once gave up her jewelry for a man who said he'd pay my medical bills. He didn't. But you and your mother, you gave me something better. You gave me language. You gave me heat. I burned the shame. Now I run a Wednesday night group called the Spark Club. We meet in the church basement. We don't cry anymore. We plan with gratitude. Elaine R. Age 69. Emma pinned the letter on the corkboard above her desk. Next to it was a quote not her mother's, but one Sylvia had loved. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. But Sylvia's voice had never shaken. It had cut through noise like a lighthouse in fog. Not to scream for help, to show you how to steer. It's a strange thing when someone becomes more alive after they're gone. That's what happened with Sylvia. She didn't fade into history. She multiplied. Her words began showing up in places you wouldn't expect. On coffee mugs, on subway posters, in the margins of high school civics textbooks. A producer from a major streaming service contacted Emma about turning Sylvia's story into a series. Emma declined. She didn't want fame, she said. She wanted function. Instead, she greenlit an educational documentary narrated by survivors, advocates, and women who'd never met Sylvia but swore she'd save them anyway. The title, The Safe. Just like her memoir. But this time, the safe wasn't just a symbol of legal planning. It was a metaphor for women who had locked away their voice for too long and were now ready to open it again. The documentary won 3 international awards, not because it was flashy, because it was real. Clips from courtrooms, voice recordings, side-by-side visuals of women before and after they took control of their lives. The kind of before and after that had nothing to do with makeup or money and everything to do with posture. One scene showed a 70-year-old woman confronting the son who tried to drain her retirement fund. She looked him in the eye and said, "I raised you better. I'm sorry you didn't become that man. But I'm not sorry I caught you." Another clip showed a young woman explaining how she used Sylvia's lessons to help her mother fight off a manipulative caregiver who had slowly isolated her from friends and family. "We got her back," she said, through tears. "And now she's the one leading our support group." This wasn't education anymore. It was reclamation. Sylvia had built more than a movement. She'd sparked a cultural shift. Universities began offering elder justice as a field of study. The Hartley principles: clarity, consent, documentation, transparency, and strategy were taught not only in law schools, but in business ethics classes. One professor put it simply, "You can teach integrity. You just have to show it in action." Emma kept the original desk Sylvia's in the initiative's new headquarters. It sat in the corner of her office, untouched, not as a shrine, as a compass. Because there were days when the noise got too loud, when media buzz or political pressure threatened to cloud the mission. And on those days, Emma would sit at that desk for 10 quiet minutes. No calls, no emails, no staff, just her, the leather-bound notepad, and the quote her mother had scrawled inside the cover, "If you speak with power, make sure it serves more than just your name." That's when Emma remembered why she was doing it all, not for brand, not for applause, but for women like Dolores who called the hotline sobbing after being duped by a fake Medicare representative, and then 6 months later sent an email saying, "I'm okay now. I took a self-defense course and joined a poker league. He doesn't get my tears anymore." Or for men like Samuel, 87, recently widowed, who caught a scammer in real time and reported it to the authorities before it spread to his community center. He ended his message with, "Tell Sylvia, I did good." And for the next generation who were growing up in a world where elderly didn't mean vulnerable and niceness didn't mean naivete. One day, a young girl came up to Emma at an event. She was maybe 9. Freckles, bright red shoes. She held up a notebook. "Can you sign this?" she asked. Emma smiled and nodded. "Sure. What should I write?" The girl thought about it. "Write what your mom would say if someone tried to trick me." Emma took the pen, and without hesitation, she wrote, "You are not prey. You are strategy in sneakers." The girl giggled and skipped away, and Emma just stood there, watching her go, realizing something powerful Sylvia had always believed she was preparing for war. But maybe, just maybe, she was preparing the world for peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from surrender, the kind that comes from strength, from awareness, from generations of women and men who no longer confuse quiet with weakness, because Sylvia had shown them how to speak and how to listen when the world tried to silence them. It was a Thursday, late spring. The sun hung low, and the air was warm, the kind of warmth that feels like a promise. The inaugural Global Elder Justice Summit was held in Vienna. 92 nations, thousands of delegates, advocates, survivors, lawmakers, educators, and at the center of it all, a memorial seat, empty, reserved. Nameplate etched in bronze. Sylvia Hartley strategy made flesh. Emma opened the summit. No cue cards, just her mother's voice in her bones. She stood at the center of the marble amphitheater, looked out across the sea of leaders, and said, "My mother wasn't born powerful. She wasn't rich. She wasn't loud. She was overlooked for years, until she chose not to be. She taught us that preparation is the opposite of panic. That silence isn't submission, it's surveillance, until the time is right. And that justice, real justice, doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes it feels like frostbite because it's killing the thing that hurt you. But once it's done, healing begins." The room stood in silence. Not stillness, respect. One by one. Survivors took the stage to share what had changed in their lives since they embraced Sylvia's teachings. A former judge from Peru told the story of how she rewrote her country's financial abuse laws because of one late-night YouTube video about Sylvia's court testimony. A nurse from South Africa explained how her entire village created fraud-free zones inspired by the quiet storm chapters. A man from Ohio wept openly as he described how he'd spent 20 years tricking seniors out of their pensions until he was caught by a woman who used Sylvia's 10-point checklist. She didn't yell. He said, "She just looked at me and said, 'I'm not scared of you, I'm prepared for you.'" And that was the moment he broke. Then, just before the summit's close, a courier arrived at the main desk, carrying an envelope, handwritten, stamped 6 years prior. It had been mailed by Sylvia Hartley with a note attached to be opened only when the first global summit convenes. Emma stepped onto the stage holding the envelope. The room held its breath. She opened it slowly, carefully unfolding the single sheet of paper, and read aloud to whoever is brave enough to lead now. If you're reading this, congratulations. You've made it farther than I ever dreamed, but exactly where I planned. By now, the system has changed, but systems are slippery. They survive by shape-shifting. Don't let them. Keep the movement human. Let it cry. Let it laugh. Let it demand. And if anyone asks where this all began, don't say it started with me. Say it started with a question. What if we stop underestimating women who've lived long enough to see through everyone? That's where the fire lives. And now it's yours to tend. The crowd rose to its feet. Some clapped. Others simply wept. Emma folded the letter with trembling hands, placed it back in its envelope, and whispered into the mic. She saw this. She saw all of this. Back home, the garden outside Sylvia's old house was blooming. A small bronze statue of her sat beneath the wisteria, not towering, just present, hands folded, face calm, as if still listening, still waiting, still watching. Every so often, someone would leave a note there, not big gestures, just words on paper, tucked gently under her feet. I stopped the scammer. You'd be proud. I testified in court. My voice didn't shake. He tried. I said no. He backed down. I told my daughter. She listened. The garden didn't become famous. It became sacred. A place where silence wasn't lonely. It was strategy gathering breath. 6 months after the summit, Emma visited the house one last time. It had been converted into a strategy and recovery center just as Sylvia hoped, but the guest room was still untouched. Same chair, same window, same view of the garden. She sat by the window for a while, watched a small group of women in their 70s walk the stone path below, laughing. Not a forced kind of laughter. The kind that only comes when your dignity is no longer under negotiation. One of them wore a Spark Club hoodie. Another held a pamphlet that read, "Protect Your Power, the Hartley Toolkit." Emma reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. No new emails, no fires to put out, just quiet. She opened the Notes app and began typing something, a speech, a letter, a mantra. She didn't know. All she wrote was this: "My mother taught me to fight smart. But more than that, she taught me to fight once so the women after me wouldn't have to." She stared at the words for a while, then hit save. That evening, the center hosted a small candlelight vigil in the garden. No media, no press releases, just survivors, families, friends, women who once whispered their fears behind closed doors, now sharing strategies by firelight. One of them asked Emma, did she ever know how far this would go? Emma smiled. She didn't guess. She said, she planned. That word planned made the group nod, because they knew now protection isn't reactive. It's designed, prepared, chosen. They passed around a small basket filled with note cards. Each person wrote a phrase they'd heard Sylvia say, or something she'd inspired them to believe about themselves. Then they read them aloud, one by one. I am not naive. I am generous with boundaries. Being polite doesn't mean I owe you anything. Preparedness is self-respect in action. My voice isn't too late. It's right on time. I'm not afraid of wolves anymore. I've learned to be the fire. Then, Emma read the final card, written in Sylvia's own handwriting, preserved from her old journals. If they try to silence you, sharpen your quiet until it cuts. No applause, just stillness, the kind that doesn't ache, it anchors. The next morning, a local 8th grade class visited the garden for a school field trip. Their teacher, Ms. Alvarez, guided them toward the statue. She pointed to the bronze figure and asked, "Do you know who this is?" One girl raised her hand. "She's the lady who stopped the scam war." Another boy chimed in. "She made a whole army of grandmas." "Ms." Alvarez smiled. "Something like that?" She handed out printed handouts titled, "The Hartley Rules for Smart Living 1. Ask twice. 2. Sign never under pressure. 3. Record everything, even when you trust. 4. Speak slowly. Let them get uncomfortable first. 5. Be kind, but never confused." They read in silence, and for a moment, the garden wasn't just filled with memory. It was filled with readiness. In a quiet neighborhood miles away, a young woman sat at her desk finishing a college application. The prompt asked, "What person, living or dead, has influenced how you make decisions?" She wrote one name, Sylvia Hartley. Then she wrote, "Because of her." I know that getting older doesn't mean becoming irrelevant. It means becoming dangerous in all the best ways, and across the world, in small homes and tall buildings, in courtrooms and coffee shops, in whispered conversations and thunderous lectures, a name kept echoing, not because it was trendy, but because it was true. Sylvia, a woman who had every reason to disappear, but instead decided to design her power. And in doing so, she gave the rest of us permission to do the same. In the early days, Sylvia used to say, "They don't hear you when you scream. They hear you when you change the rules." And she did. Now, years later, the rules were different. Not perfect, but different. Banks train their staff on the Sylvia Protocol, a procedure to pause large financial transfers initiated by seniors under observable stress. Doctors were now required to ask elderly patients about not just physical abuse, but financial and emotional coercion, Telecom companies began embedding scam prevention pop-ups and audio warnings into cold call systems. One even partnered with the Hartley Initiative to roll out a feature called Pause and Verify. With one tap, a user could instantly flag suspicious activity, automatically send a request for backup to a family member or local advocate, and play a recorded message stating, "This call is being documented and reviewed under protective protocols." It saved thousands. But more than that, it empowered. Because nothing unnerves a predator like preparedness. At a quiet tech conference in Norway, a cybersecurity engineer gave a keynote on elder data protection. In the final slide of his talk, he quoted Sylvia, "Don't teach old dogs new tricks. Teach them to write the rule book." The audience stood, not because the tech was brilliant, but because the spirit behind it was. In New Zealand, a tiny island town installed benches engraved with phrases from Sylvia's letters. They weren't monuments, they were reminders. One read, "You don't owe anyone your confusion." Another, "Start with no. Work backward." In India, a poet published a collection titled Letters to Sylvia. It wasn't about her. It was about what she made people feel, seen, armed, unapologetically awake. Back in the States, Emma received an invitation to speak at a university's graduation ceremony. The class valedictorian was 72. Her name was Rose. She had survived 2 abusive marriages, 1 scam, and a house fire. She walked across the stage in orthopedic shoes and a sequined cap that read, "Too old to be underestimated." When she hugged Emma, she whispered, "Tell your mom I made it." And Emma, blinking back tears, whispered back, "She knows." Not every battle had been won. Fraud still existed. Manipulation still found new forms. But the world had changed something fundamental, its assumptions. It no longer saw older women as soft targets. It saw them as sentinels, capable of holding history in one hand and strategy in the other. Sylvia didn't just protect a fortune, she rewrote the meaning of legacy, not as wealth passed down, but as clarity passed forward. One evening, long after the emails stopped and the meetings wrapped, Emma sat at her mother's desk again. She opened a drawer that hadn't been touched in years. Inside was an old notepad, yellowed, faded. At the top of the page, in Sylvia's handwriting, were 3 lines. They weren't legal notes, they weren't strategy diagrams, just thoughts. Let them think you're quiet. Let them think you're small. Then teach them how you built the storm they drown in. Emma closed the drawer and exhaled, not from sadness, from completion. It was never about revenge. It was about restoration. And now, that restoration had become inheritance. So now, maybe it's time we talk about you. Yes, you. Sitting there with your phone, or your laptop, or your tablet. Maybe you're sipping tea. Maybe you're scrolling late at night. Maybe you're not even sure why you clicked this video, but here's what I know you're here. Which means, at some point in your life, you felt it. That tightening in your gut when someone talks down to you. That flicker of doubt when you were asked to just sign here. That feeling, subtle but sharp, that you're being underestimated. Maybe it was a financial decision. Maybe it was an emotional trap disguised as love. Maybe someone told you it's too late to start over. Or worse, you're too old to understand. But what Sylvia Hartley proved, what she lived, is this. They only say that because they're hoping you won't notice the knife behind their back. And now you know better. You're not naive. You're not overreacting. You're not difficult. You're awake. And once you're awake, the world has to change or be revealed. So here's what you do next. Not tomorrow. Now. Start your strategy. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't need headlines. It just needs you to stop being available for manipulation. Review your passwords. Talk to your parents. Ask questions even if they roll their eyes. Teach your kids the difference between a helping hand and a hidden hook. Call your grandmother. Call your mother. Call the friend who's too polite to say she's scared. Be the Sylvia in your circle. Not loud, not flashy. Just deliberate, prepared, unshakable. Let people call you paranoid. Let them call you difficult. Let them say you've changed. And when they do smile, because it means your power is finally showing. Sylvia didn't save everyone. She wasn't a savior. She was a mirror, held up to the world to reflect what it looked like when a woman refused to disappear. She didn't make noise for attention. She made strategy for protection. And because of that, women are waking up everywhere. Women who are done being polite at their own expense. Women who are finished making themselves smaller so others feel bigger. Women who've lived long enough to see through the charm, the spin, the promises. And now they're building systems. They're teaching. They're protecting. They're telling stories like this one. So you never forget, the world only wins when you stay silent. Don't let it. Let Sylvia's story be more than a warning. Let it be your wake-up call. Because the moment you decide to prepare, not panic, to plan, not beg, to question, not blindly trust, you stop being prey and start becoming the force that predators pray to avoid. Let that be your legacy. Let that be your silence sharpened into something unforgettable. Imagine this. The screen fades to black. Then slowly it lights up with the face of a woman. Not Sylvia, not Emma. Someone else. Someone who looks familiar. Because she looks like you. She's standing in her kitchen, hair wrapped in a towel, glasses on, reading a bill. But this time, she doesn't freeze. She picks up her phone, calls the hotline, asks the right questions. Cut to another woman, early 80s, leaning over a chessboard at a senior center. She moves a piece. Checkmate. Her opponent laughs and says, "Where'd you learn that move?" She smiles. "My late husband taught me, but Sylvia taught me when to use it." Then another scene. A teenage girl teaching her grandmother how to recognize scam texts. "Always look for urgency," she says. "Real institutions don't pressure you." Her grandma nods, then smiles. "I used to be scared. Now I forward them to the FBI." Then a mother, sitting at the kitchen table with her adult daughter. "I'm updating my will," she says. "And I'm including you, but I want a neutral third party to review it with us." The daughter hesitates. The mother holds her gaze. "This isn't about trust," she says. "It's about protection. For both of us." Then, the screen fades again, and we hear voices soft at first. Women of different ages, different accents, different worlds. One by one, they say the things they wish they'd known sooner. You can be kind, without being a victim. Power is the ability to walk away. If they rush you, it's because they hope you won't see the trap. Control disguised as love is still control. Preparedness isn't paranoia, it's peace. And then, one final voice. Emma's. My mother wasn't perfect. She was prepared. And she taught me that silence can be a sanctuary or a weapon. It depends on whether you chose it or it was chosen for you. The screen fades. One quote appears. "Strategy is love, with teeth." Sylvia Hartley. then now it's your move. The music builds, not dramatic, just steady. A heartbeat with strings. Names of real survivors appear on screen, first names only. Photos, locations, stories. Some short, took back my house. Age 71, learned to say no. Age 63, reported my son. Saved myself. Age 80, started law school. Age 68. Each face glows with clarity. Not vengeance, not fear, just presence. Then the screen cuts to a garden. Her garden. Empty. Still. Then a breeze. The hydrangeas sway. The statue stands. Silent. Watching. And just before the screen fades to black, a new woman walks into the garden. She places a folded note beneath the statue, then walks away. The camera doesn't read the note, but we know what it says. After the video ends, there's silence, but not the kind that's empty. The kind that's earned. The kind that wraps itself around you like armor, not because it protects you from the world, but because it reminds you who you are in it. Because let's be honest, most people think power looks like noise, volume, wealth, flash. But Sylvia, she taught us that real power is made in silence, in the space between the question and your answer, in the pause before you sign, in the breath you take before saying no. That's where sovereignty lives. And if you've made it this far, if you're still watching, still listening, still leaning into every moment of this story, then part of you is already sovereign. Because sovereign people don't just react. They respond. They prepare. They look at the world, at its manipulations, its glittering bait, its hollow promises, and say, I see you, and I choose differently. Sylvia didn't change because someone gave her permission. She changed because she refused to play small any longer. And in doing so, she gave us all a blueprint, not for perfection, but for protection, for preparedness, for that sacred moment when someone thinks they've got you cornered, and you smile not because you're trapped, but because they have no idea what you're holding behind your back. Not a weapon, a strategy, not revenge, a plan. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. You are allowed to design your safety. You are allowed to speak slowly, to read the fine print, to question motives even from people you love. You are allowed to be kind and firm, to be soft and strategic, to be older and unbreakable. You are allowed to say, I need to think about it, without guilt. You are allowed to say no, with no explanation attached. You are allowed to walk away from people who confuse your warmth for weakness. Because guess what? You're not weak. You're watching. You're listening. You're learning. And when the time comes, you'll act. Not out of fear, not out of rage, but out of a kind of radical clarity that no scam, no manipulation, no predator can penetrate. Because you've been paying attention, because you've been preparing in silence, just like Sylvia. And if you're thinking, but I've already been fooled, I've already made mistakes, I've already lost, let me stop you. You haven't lost. You've learned. You've gathered data. You've seen the wolf's teeth. And now you're dangerous. Not because you're cruel, but because you know better. You're no longer a mystery to yourself. You're a strategy unfolding. And like Sylvia, you don't need to be loud to be unforgettable. So now the question is simple. Not easy, but simple. What will you do with your silence? Will you fill it with doubt, or will you turn it into a decision? Because here's the truth. Every time you trust your gut, every time you read the contract twice. Every time you pause before giving someone access to your life, you're not being difficult, you're being deliberate. You're building what Sylvia built, one sharp, steady choice at a time. You're choosing legacy over loyalty, clarity over comfort, boundaries over being liked. And in a world that often asks you to shrink, that's a revolution. No hashtags, no billboards, just you, wiser, quieter, stronger than they expected. Before we close, let me leave you with this. There is no age limit on awakening. There is no expiration date on your voice. And there is no such thing as being too late to become someone powerful. Sylvia didn't change the world because she had everything figured out. She changed the world because she refused to keep quiet once she did. So if you're watching this and thinking, could I be that woman? The answer is yes. You already are. You just have to decide to believe it. And when you do, the world will change not because it wants to, but because it has no choice. If this story moved you, if it sparked something, if it reminded you of your own quiet power, don't let it fade. Talk about it. Share it. Protect someone because of it. And most importantly, start building your own plan. Write the will. Have the hard conversation. Read the fine print. Ask for help if you need it. Teach someone younger. Ask someone older. Say, I don't know out loud, and then go find out. Because Sylvia may be gone. But the storm she built, it's still gathering. And maybe now, you're the one holding the lightning.